Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Answer me this, fellas. If the Sasquatch creatures exist, why is it so hard finding evidence for them? The only thing people have for evidence is photos from far away, where it could easily be mistaken for a guy in a suit or a bear standing up. The footprints found have always been inconclusive, with the different size and number of toes differing. I find it incredulous that we can find fossilized remains of creatures that died out millions of years ago, but we can't find remains of something alive today.
Fossilization only occurs in places where the environment allows for rapid burial and preservation, such as deserts or on or in rivers, river banks or lake beds. But even then, fossilization is considered a rare occurrence. There are probably thousands, even hundreds of thousands of creatures that have never been fossilized, simply because they were uncommon. Sasquatch is considered the most elusive creature in North America. The population numbers are probably low, with each individual most likely living by themselves in a large area of forest, only grouping with others to reproduce, fight for land rights. Because of this, their remains are going to be rare, and most likely hidden deep in the mountains or forests, being covered each and every day by a new layer of deadfall and leaf litter. You're not going to find Sasquatch remains on a 2-hour walk in your nearest park. This Sasquatch is simply another animal. It eats, drinks, shits, fights, and sleeps. I won't be surprised if sometime in the future some hiker, camper, or park ranger deep in the woods does come across the remains of one individual, but I think it will be a long time until someone actually finds a living specimen.
I'm pretty new to Sasquatch lore, so sorry if this is a stupid question, but which hominin does it descend from? Is there fossil evidence of its ancestors actually making it to North America? When is it supposed to have come here?
That's actually a very good question. As far as I know, no hard scientific evidence like fossils have been found to support the idea that a large ape-like creature now resides in North America, as well as Australia, although there are many different theories. Even though there is no hard evidence to show its migration from other continents and evolution, there have been many sightings, recorded vocalizations, and more evidence supporting its existence. Sadly, I don't think we will be able to prove, for once and for all, that it actually exists without a skeletal remains or fossil record, and be a live or dead specimen. But even now, I do believe that Sasquatch exists, or did exist at some point in both North America and Australia. As for when it came to North America, Australia, my best guess is that a common ancestor came over from conjoined continents, similar to how early humans spread across the globe. They then evolved to suit their environments, evolving to better suit food sources in their now home continents.
They were probably hunted to, near, extinction by the Adinas and other pre-Columbian races. Since the North American plains had plentiful meat and agricultural sources, domesticated plants, Neolithic to Bronze Age, humans never needed to settle down in one place and devote all their time to farming the land for food. Compared to other places, like say the Greek peninsula, where there is not a lot of meat to hunt or fish, man is forced to settle on the land and grow crops for trade and sustenance. This forms the roots of what we consider civilization, but that is a biased view. What they, the prehistoric North Americans, did was devote a lot of their time to warfare. They had elaborate oral traditions and histories, but how do you prove this with just bones and buried objects? There is evidence, scant and dubious because a lot of it was covered up in the late 19th, early 20th century and generally censored, that supports a multi-species model of North America. That is to say, as late as 1000 BCE, competing hominids coexisted on the plains of North America and engaged in tribal warfare. I am speculating here, but it is not unlikely that the more primitive ones who relied on brute strength and speed to run down their prey were exterminated by the more intelligent and organized ones who used sharp weapons and projectiles, fought in groups of 10 or 20, and used fire and smoke to create fear. The biggest problem here with finding fossil evidence is the sheer size of the continent. There are burial mounds dated back to as early as 2000 BCE which show some human activity and give us a rough idea of what Neolithic man was doing in North America. But beyond that, it becomes tricky. We find dinosaurs because they were around for hundreds of thousands of years and sediment built up over their bodies. The case for prehistoric genus of man or other competing bipedal creatures is difficult, since the timescales are much shorter for evidence to be entombed in rock.
It's pretty uncommon to find corpses of top-level predatory animals laying around in the woods, since decomposition leads to a pretty quick destruction of any real evidence, and if these Sasquatch are a race of proto-hominids, they may be intelligent enough to have burial rituals which hide their dead. I live on an Indian reservation in the northwestern US, and to the tribes, Sasquatch is real. Not a mythological creature, it's real and not even considered an animal, but a different kind of man who has shared this land with them since time immemorial. They also have a strong taboo towards bothering them. It brings bad luck to even see one. You had similar taboo towards other top-level predators across the world. For example, even saying bear was taboo in Russia, because it was thought that saying the name could summon one. So they began to call them medved, honey eater, instead. The original word disappeared into legend. Some tribes have the same taboo around Sasquatch, which is why skookum, meaning strong one, is used interchangeably.
I suppose it's hard for me to believe that a primitive hominin would be able to avoid people for so long. Like, even if they were extremely xenophobic and neophobic like Neanderthals are thought to have been, you'd think there'd be stupid chance encounters. Sasquatch is approaching domestic animals more frequently. Sasquatch is wandering into roadways, etc. Why would they avoid humans so carefully, and how?
We are still discovering animals, regular animals to this day. Did you see that frog that looks like Kermit? That was a recent discovery. We discover things that come from the sea as well, creatures we never knew existed. Some of the animals we know of today we didn't know they existed 60 years ago. It is not that crazy for Bigfoot to be hiding like that, especially if they are smarter than a coyote or a bear.
My dad is in a woods mountain man, has been his whole life. We walked the Appalachian Trail together, just looking off the trail. The vegetation in these dense woods is just incredible. I'm 6'5" and some of these weeds and thick brush were just about up to my eyes. No way in hell did we stay off trail for longer than a quick break. My point is that we're not trained to live in such dense places in modern times. So imagine a bipedal ape who is accustomed to traversing these dense woods and has similar instincts as us. They could hear us coming just as we can hear a deer or bear walking through the woods. Wouldn't take much for one to either run or hide in these dense places when they hear us coming.
As a hunter, I have trouble finding deer or moose when I wade into an area that is supposedly crawling with them. And that's with the advantage of knowing how to track and find them and having all sorts of bait and calls at my disposal. Add in the fact that predators are even harder to track and find. I guess what I'm trying to say is that it is already very difficult to find animals in the wild when they don't want to be found. Add in the fact that we don't actually know much about Sasquatch behaviors aside from anecdotal evidence, and that makes it damn near impossible. I imagine that we could turn up some more information if we were able to get a reasonable idea of where they could possibly be, and then encourage more hunters/trackers/hikers to explore those areas. Just having more reasonable people put their eyes and trail cams out there might help, instead of just having that handful of Sasquatch enthusiasts go out on the public trails for a night, set up one trail cam, get spooked and then swear up and down that they had an encounter. I always have found it odd that with all supposed sightings and even attacks that absolutely no one has ever shot at one, at least not that I have heard of. Of all the hunters in North America, myself included, I can only imagine that if a hunter came across one, the logical thing would be to shoot it. Even if it wasn't attacking you, but for, naturally, human greed. If someone shot one and killed it, or even wounded it, most people would take the corpse and try to turn it in for money or take a sample of its DNA and prove its existence. Having said that, it brings up yet another question. It is fully possible that someone has killed one in the past and done just what I mentioned and turned it in for research or for payment, but perhaps the government will never allow such a fact to get loose. Why is anyone's guess? Just some thoughts I have on the Bigfoot/Sasquatch evidence theory.
I heard a story about a guy who was allegedly kidnapped by a family of Sasquatches and stayed with them for a while before running away. I also heard another story of a hominid creature killing rabbits from a farm by squeezing them to death, and the famed shot it with a rifle when he spotted it in a field. Several days later, the farmer's children spotted a wounded hairy creature in the grass with its arms out as if wanting help. How smart would these creatures be, given that they exist?
Even if they were as smart as gorillas, that is still insanely smart. If we were to go off the assumption that Sasquatches do exist, then we could also look at how they have never been reported to have bluff-charged anybody, beaten their chest, or done any of that aggressive gorilla song and dance. Lots of the supposed encounters do seem to have stuff like tree shaking, rock throwing, and hooping, growling sounds. which all sounds like a higher level of communication than how gorillas express their displeasure with us. Even these rock apes from Vietnam behave just like regular apes apparently, but were and still are incredibly hard to find evidence.
I used to live next door to a Vietnam veteran. He would come over and share military stories with my father. He was sick from being sprayed with Agent Orange all time moving to new locations through the jungle. He said vast areas of foliage had just withered. They hated moving through there. Nowhere to hide, just in the open. He said when you were not watching for Charlie, you were looking for aggressive apes being displaced by war activity. He talked about them like he didn't know they shouldn't be there. He said they killed them no differently than the water bison that would get aggressive. Every time he would bring up the Agent Orange story, the ape story would follow toe. I asked if they were supposed to be shooting native wildlife. He said the government just told them to get their job done. It was understood animals are casualties in war. A lot of Marines would use AK-47s they picked up after combat. So farmers that found dead livestock had a hard time claiming reparation for their loss. They were told to never report animals they killed with enemy assault rifles. I asked if any military journalists ever showed up in the areas and took photos of them. The journalist went where they were told. They photographed and interviewed who they were instructed to. Some dead animals in a dead jungle wasn't the propaganda they were looking for. Never told him the apes he shot are not supposed to exist. He just really seemed so genuine in his story. He wasn't into the paranormal or crypto stuff. Just your average beer drinking, motorcycle riding, retired suburbanite. Never knew what to make of it.
A good explanation I've heard is that evidence is tightly covered up for the reason that if they were proven to exist, they could possibly be put on the endangered species list, and thus severely hinder logging rights within the area in which they are proven to live. The same holds true with endangered species of birds in the Pacific Northwest. The logging companies hate those hippies who make it their life's work to seek out and protect endangered birds, and in some cases succeed in preventing a company from cutting down trees within an X-mile radius of said tree. Feel free to correct me, as I'm just going off drunk conjecture.
When I was a young man back in 1979, I was hiking and camping in Washington State. I witnessed 3 Sasquatch, one very large, between 9 to 10 feet tall, one between 6 to 7 feet tall, and the last being smaller at 5 feet, at less than 50 yards distance on the edge of a creek. I observed them in marvel and fear for more than 10 minutes before they apparently became aware of my presence and retreated quickly up a very steep slope, a slope that would not be scalable by any man. I can say that experience changed my life and my understanding of man's place. They are not animals. They are an intelligent, massively athletic, and perfectly adapted for their environment. I understand people are skeptical. I would be too if I had never witnessed what I did. Talk with those that live closest to nature, like the Native Americans, and they accept this species as being the master of the forest. Many Americans have never wandered into the wilderness, and yet they seem to feel they have complete understanding. This is man's arrogance. It is fortunate there is such vast wilderness inaccessible and untouched by man, and I am confident if that remains the case, this species will continue to thrive. In the wilderness, man is not the top species, not even by the longest long shot. I would say that anyone that would shoot a Sasquatch under the label of science should be convicted of murder. They are not animals, but another species equal to us. My hope is that man never captures or kills one, but is left in his arrogance and ignorance. Have a great day.
I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm a herpetologist. I travel frequently into the North Georgia mountains, up into the Helen area in the Chattahoochee-Oconee National Forest. On this day, I was going there to observe some wildlife that I frequently study. This was last September 2016. It was approximately 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening, and as I was going to my usual sites, and I observed that there was no wildlife active. I didn't notice it at first, but I did later on, and as I was walking, I walked up to a ridge and I noticed there was something diagonal from me. It was on the ground and it wasn't moving. I was about 20 to 25 feet away from it. I moved towards it and it jumped up and spun around very quickly. I realized, This was something very out of the ordinary, something I hadn't seen before. And it was sitting there and it was staring at me, and some minutes had passed and, at this point in time, it was making moans or growls. It was making sounds close to that. That's the best way I can describe it. It was man-like. It was approximately 7.5 to 8 feet tall and 4.5 feet from shoulder to shoulder. It was very large and bulky. Some might say it was ape-like, but in my opinion, due to my studying various wildlife, it was not anything close to being an ape. It was like a man. There was absolutely nothing ape about it. Very muscular. The hands, the best I can describe the hands, are about a size 13 or 14 or maybe even larger, as far as trying to fit a ring on it. Very muscular. I cannot stress this enough. You could see the whites of the eyes, unlike other creatures. They were squinted and aggressive. The forehead was not ape-like. It was more Homo sapiens than ape. It did have full body hair except for the hands and feet. There was hair on the knees and elbows. It had hair like a man. The teeth. I was able to observe the teeth as they were bared most of the time. The teeth were like a man's. They did have 3 or 4 canines, but they were worn and pretty nasty. I stood in front of this creature for a significant amount of time. I didn't know whether to run or just stand there or do whatever you do. Definitely, this creature could outrun me. Like I was saying, the hands and the skin were tanned. They weren't black. I wouldn't even say dark brown. They were just tanned. It did have fingernails. Human-like. They didn't have blood on them. I was able to tell that. This was all happening, and as I was observing its hands, he was sizing me up. That's the best way I can describe it. Then I picked up a log. I was able to observe that. He was most likely right-handed. I know this is going to be hard to believe, but it's true, and it chucked it in my general direction. Notice I said him. It did have male sexual organs. I was able to observe that. No tail. It walked upright. It had brownish-reddish hair. It was matted. I'm not 100% sure if it was due to the Georgia clay or if that was his actual hair color. I was able to observe it was a mix of brown and red. After it chucked the log, at this point in time, I started backing up slowly. It didn't charge me or try to beat me or anything like that I was expecting. I was slowly backing up. There was a strong stench and body odor. Somewhat that of a wet dog. But, I'd say, probably 100 times stronger. I was backing up, and this all happened within 2 minutes. And I slowly started backing up down the ridge, and eventually, I got out of sight and I made a beeline back to where I came from. It was definitely real, beyond a shadow of a doubt. It was what some might say was a Bigfoot, Sasquatch, or whatever. It was not a man. It was not a native creature that's seen every day. Someone might make their own decision about it. That's all I got to say. There wasn't much to compare it to, but about 400 pounds. The forehead was sunken back and the shoulders were more forward. It didn't have a proper human posture. It was definitely leaning more forward than straight up. It's rare to see somebody that would be as muscular as that creature. It was exhibiting more caution, on the verge of aggression. The eyes. I was able to observe the eyes did have more downright fear, but there was aggressiveness there. The eyes were squinted. The breathing was rapid, and going by the noises the creature was making, it was threatened.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.